It sits on a hill like a forgotten temple abandoned by its gods, yet still glowing with mystery. This is not just a house, this is a shrine, a manifesto, a fever dream cast in concrete. Designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, dreamed by Aline Barnsdall. Perched above Hollywood as if performing for the entire city, this is a house you don't inhabit, you enter it. The year is 1919. Los Angeles is still a mirage in the desert, with delusions of empire. Oil gushes from the ground. The new medium of film glows on silver screens. The city is trying on shapes wild subdivisions, orange groves giving way to motion picture palaces. And there, on a 36-acre crown called Olive Hill, stands Aline Barnsdall, an oil heiress, a feminist, an avant-garde patron who dreams of turning this patch of scrubland into a radical arts enclave. She hires the most visionary architect in America, believing together they could build a modern acropolis. But Frank Lloyd Wright doesn't just bring blueprints. He brings a storm, a man emerging from personal catastrophe. Just a decade earlier, Wright's life had spiraled into Gothic tragedy. His love with Mama Borthwick Cheney scandalized Oak Park society, destroying his marriage, his standing, staining his reputation. Then in 1914, Taliesin, the home he built for the love of his life, Mama in Wisconsin, became the scene of unspeakable horror. A deranged servant set it ablaze, wielding an axe that took 7 lives, including Mama's and her children's. Wright found himself haunted by ashes, scandal, lawsuits, fleeing America in grief. Japan offered him refuge. By 1919, he was completing the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, an engineering marvel that would soon famously withstand the Great Kanto earthquake. So when Barnsdall called, Wright was still reinventing himself, part exile, part prophet. Los Angeles, then so raw and optimistic, was the perfect canvas for his own rebirth. Barnsdall dreamed of a modernist utopia, an open-air theater, artists' studios, housing for avant-garde players of the Little Theater movement. She wanted community, collaboration, a living experiment in art and social change. Wright wanted something else. He envisioned architecture as ritual space, as prophecy. From the first sketches, it was clear. Barnsdall would get not a civic campus, but a kind of temple. Their clashes were epic, costs ballooned, delays piled up. Barnsdall grew disillusioned, but the two shared one belief, that art should be an act of defiance. Hollyhock House emerged from this tension, a work neither fully hers nor entirely his, a collision of wills that left the building charged like a storm cloud. This was no prairie house. Gone were the long horizontal lines, the warm Midwestern woods, the hearths designed for intimate family life. Here, Wright began shaping what scholars would call his California romanza, a lyrical architecture of sun, myth, and elemental drama. Influences bled together in strange alchemy. Pre-Columbian temples he'd studied obsessively with their terraced masses, Japanese courtyards and water gardens from his years in Tokyo, even echoes of ancient Egyptian sanctuaries in the way spaces unfold solemnly toward light. This house was less a shelter, more a sanctuary built for rites no one could quite name. Wright was forging a new movement, not just stylistically, but spiritually. A break from domestic coziness, a declaration that modern life demanded new rituals, new geometries, new myths. The house is a puzzle box of symbols. At its heart stands the fireplace, elevated, massive, with stylized sunbursts radiating across it. Above, stained glass windows filter daylight into molten gold. Below, water once flowed around the hearth in hidden channels. Fire and water, light and stone. Wright was orchestrating elements like a liturgy. But look closer, and you see something older, stirring beneath the modernism, something almost mythic. Stand at a distance, and Hollyhock House doesn't whisper prairie, it broods. It stands in tiered platforms, like a ziggurat unearthed. The way the structure recedes in stacked terraces, each level narrower, echoes the temples at Uxmal or Chichen Itza, those Mesoamerican masterpieces designed to lift priests ever closer to the sun. Wright was captivated by these forms. He spoke of architecture as the mother art born of building temples. Here he didn't quote Greek columns. He reached for the primal geometries of the Americas. The thick battered walls wider at the base, tapering as they rise, recall the talud tablero profiles of ancient Mexico. Even the ornament is a kind of cryptic script. Not floral vines or delicate flourishes, but glyph-like incisions, abstracted hollyhocks, repeated with priestly solemnity across parapets and door surrounds. They look less like a garden motif and more like sacred emblems, fragments of a ritual language lost to time. And just as Mesoamerican builders aligned their pyramids to the solar calendar, Wright made Hollyhock a temple of the sun. Light isn't just welcome here, it's worshipped. Morning rays ignite the hearth like a votive flame. Afternoon beams cut through the gloom like celestial blades. Windows become apertures for light to perform its sacred dance. So Hollyhock House stands on its Hollywood hill like a forgotten pyramid, weathered, sunstruck, yet unbowed. Not just a modern house, but an American monument reaching back to older, continental memories, to when building meant communing with the cosmos. Wright chose poured concrete, a material alien to cozy domestic architecture. He left it rough, textured, primal. It feels unearthed, not constructed like ruins found, not built. Inside, shafts of sunlight slice the gloom. Corners made entirely of glass dissolve the boundary between interior and horizon. At night, lanterns cast glyph-like shadows on the walls, architecture becoming shadow play. But this new style was also flawed. Flat roofs leaked, cracks spidered through the walls. The sun, so worshipped by Wright, became the house's slow destroyer. Yet that was the price of poetry. Hollyhock was never meant to be merely livable. It was meant to astonish. Today, the house stands restored, a National Historic Landmark, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Los Angeles has grown monstrous around it, but on Olive Hill, time still moves differently. Walk through it and you feel what Wright sought, not comfort, but revelation, not privacy, but myth. For all its flaws, Hollyhock House is immortal because it is unfinished not in its concrete, but in its meaning. Every sunbeam that crosses its walls writes a new verse in its poem of shadow and light. Completed in 1921, Hollyhock House was among the first structures in Los Angeles to break entirely from European precedent. Its influence is everywhere in how California modernism embraces sun, shadow, and space, in how we still see homes as statements of belief. It was the first of Wright's buildings to enter the UNESCO list. It paved the way for Fallingwater, for the spirals of the Guggenheim, for every audacious home that makes you question what a house is for. And it was born from scandal and rebirth, a phoenix of concrete on a hill in Hollywood. If architecture is the art of space, then this is where it starts to feel like music. If you believe buildings have souls and stories worth telling, subscribe to Space Shape and Scale. We explore the past to illuminate the present, one iconic structure at a time. New episodes every week, more myths, more masterpieces, more meaning. What if the ruins of the future were already here? What if a house could speak, not of comfort, but of prophecy? Not a home, but a memory from a civilization that never came to be. A myth wrapped in concrete, a temple built not for gods, but for machines. In the Hollywood Hills, high above the shimmering grid of Los Angeles, a structure waits in silence. And if you've watched Blade Runner, you've already been inside. This is the Ennis House, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, built in 1924, and still nearly a century later, one of the most cinematic, enigmatic, and philosophical works of American architecture. Los Angeles in the 1920s was less a city and more a mirage, sunlight on concrete, dreams built on dust. It was the age of neon and nitrate film, of fast fortunes and unstable ground. A new kind of metropolis defined not by cathedrals or kings, but by cameras, real estate, and reinvention. Wright had just returned from Japan, having completed the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo. He arrived in Los Angeles brimming with ideas not to recreate Europe, but to invent something new from the ground up. And he did mean from the ground up, his next houses would not sit on the landscape. they would grow from it. The Ennis House would be his boldest attempt. When Charles Ennis, a wealthy men's clothier, approached Wright, he wanted a home of dignity, permanence, and mystery, something ancient, something no neighbor could imitate. Wright responded not with columns or gables, but with an experiment, a system of modular, patterned concrete, what he called textile block construction. The home wouldn't be built in the traditional sense. It would be woven, block by block, like a massive geometric tapestry. The Ennis House was the fourth and grandest in a series of textile block homes, and unlike the others, it would not whisper, it would loom. Wright believed a house should unfold like a ritual, an experience, not just a floor plan. The Ennis House doesn't greet you with a cozy porch. It draws you in along a dramatic axis, up a narrow stair, through monumental gates, into a sunken, almost cavernous living room. The walls are lined with over 27,000 concrete blocks, each hand-cast with a Mayan-inspired motif. The result is rhythmic and cryptic, a coded language etched in stone. Massive piers alternate with light-perforated walls, letting in sunlight like dappled jungle light in a ruin. It's not coincidence. Wright was inspired by the temples of Uxmal and Palenque, and the house channels their mystery. But the construction? Entirely modern, reinforced concrete and steel. It is the past, reassembled by the future. The Ennis House is not merely ancient-looking, it's mechanical in its logic. Every block is a module, every facade a grid. But what emerges isn't cold repetition, it's aesthetic resonance. The layout choreographs your movement. Terraces open to panoramic city views. Narrow corridors compress before releasing you into soaring spaces. There is a psychological rhythm to it all, a push and pull between enclosure and expansion. Inside, light pools through clear-story windows. Shadows stretch across coffered ceilings. It feels sacred. You don't just inhabit the Ennis House, you perform it. And then decades later, Ridley Scott saw it. In 1982's Blade Runner, the Ennis House became the apartment of Rick Deckard, a haunted loner in a decaying future Los Angeles. No other structure could have carried the same weight. Its patterned walls felt ancient and artificial, its dim interiors, both spiritual and decayed. Here was the paradox of the future, a world where progress had failed and myth had returned through architecture. This wasn't a sci-fi set piece, it was prophetic atmosphere. And so the Ennis House entered the cultural subconscious, not as a residence, but as a mood, a code, a metaphor for memory, loss, and post-human identity. And always, always it warned us. Frank Lloyd Wright never wrote dystopian fiction, but in the Ennis House, he prefigured its architecture. Here was a building that embodied duality, ancient and modern, machine-made and handcrafted, beautiful and flawed. The concrete cracked, the hillside shifted, and yet something about that vulnerability deepened its meaning. Like a replicant in Blade Runner, the house was more than its material parts. It had soul, or at least the ghost of one. Architecture in this case became memory storage, a vessel of time, capable of carrying both dreams and warnings. By the 1990s, the house was crumbling. Weather and earthquakes had left it in ruin. Restoration efforts took years and millions. But like any myth worth saving, it was resurrected. Today, it stands protected, a historic cultural monument, a pilgrimage site for architects, filmmakers, and fans of visionary design. It is not easy to live in. It was never meant to be. It was meant to be felt. The Ennis House is a paradox carved in stone. It is both prophecy and memory, future and ruin, a warning about what happens when the machine inherits the myth. And in our next episode, we'll descend from the hills to the city and trade myth for movement. Click on the next video to continue this architectural timeline, as we follow the evolution of modernism one radical home at a time. Subscribe to Space, Shape, and Scale for cinematic journeys into architecture's turning points, visionary minds, and the forms that shape how we live, think, and dream. What if a house wasn't just a place to live, but a composition of light? What if a wall could be woven, not stacked, its very pattern letting the sun in? And what if, on the eve of the Great Depression, a single home on the prairie quietly bridged two of American architecture's boldest chapters, the mythic past and a democratic future? This is Westhope Frank Lloyd Wright's 1929 house for his cousin, the publisher Richard Lloyd Jones, a poised, luminous hinge between Wright's Mayan Revival experiments and the coming Usonian Revolution. Tulsa in the late 1920s is a city in fast-forward oil fortunes, new highways, the hum of printing presses. It is neither Chicago's monumentality nor Los Angeles's cinematic glamour. It is the frontier of business and belief. And in this prairie outpost, Wright is offered a canvas at once personal and public, a home for a newspaperman who makes and breaks the day's narrative. Richard Lloyd Jones is not merely a client. He is kin and kindred in appetite for ideas, controversy, and clarity. He asks Wright for a modern house, not a mannered one. The site is level, the sky is vast. To understand Westhope, we have to feel the turbulence in Wright's life. The prairie years are behind him, the long, serene horizontals that married hearth to horizon. In California, he has just staged his audacious textile block dramas. Hollyhock House, Millard House, Storer House, Freeman House, Ennis House carved masonry that channels a romantic, pre-Columbian gravitas. Critics call it Mayan Revival. Wright thinks of it as a structural tapestry, blocks cast with pattern, stacked into ornamented monoliths. Those houses are heavy, ritual, earthbound. Then a pivot. The 1920s end with a nation on the brink. Wright needs lightness literally and spiritually. He carries forward the logic of the block, but exchanges mass for luminosity. Westhope will be his proof. A wall that is still a weave, but now the weft is glass. Jones's home must host gatherings, cajole conversations, and frame columns of text yet unwritten. Wright replies with a composition that reads like a newspaper page. Columns, ribbons, white space, bold leads. The material palette is sober and forward-looking, at once poured concrete blocks, glass block, steel, wood, a harmony of the ordinary transformed by pattern and proportion. The house is sited with reserve, not an object postcard, a presence. Approached obliquely, its facades alternate between opacity and glow. It is a lantern that refuses spectacle. It wants to be inhabited, not merely admired. In Los Angeles, Wright's textile blocks acted like carved stone, deep, shadowed, iconographic. At Westhope, he transposes the score. The pattern becomes light. Concrete block is scored with fine linear grooves, an austere cousin of the Mayan motif. Between vertical stacks of block, continuous bands of glass block appear, translucent rather than transparent, turning sunlight into ambient architecture. This is the genius of Westhope. The wall is not a barrier, but a filter, not a picture window, but a veil. By day, the house flickers with softened daylight that falls in stripes and squares across floors and plaster. By night, interior lamps reverse the composition. The house becomes a softly glowing instrument, a prairie light box. And yet, this is no dematerialized modernist box. The grid holds. The pattern is quiet but legible. You sense in your body the measure of the house, the room as a bar of music, the corridor as a line of verse. Wright composes Westhope as a spatial stanza, long measured lines punctuated by rests and emphases. The entry underplays drama, then releases it, a compressed threshold opening into a double-height living hall. A balcony traverses this volume like a lightly drawn staff-line motion without weight. Corner glazing breaks the tyranny of the box, letting the eye slide diagonally into the landscape. Built-in seating, hearths, and cabinetry register the grid. Furniture aligns with structure, refusing clutter. Movement is not symmetrical but metrical. Rooms don't mirror, they answer one another. The house breathes porous, cross-ventilated, orchestrated to the path of sun and the bias of the Oklahoma wind. Guests remark that Westhope makes them quiet, not hushed by grandeur, but steadied by order. The grid is not a cage, it is a tempo. You cook to it, read to it, quarrel and reconcile to it. Pattern becomes a kind of ethics, clarity, measure, restraint. Let's name the inheritance. In the Mayan houses, Wright discovered architecture as text, walls carrying narrative relief. At Westhope, he keeps that literacy but changes the alphabet, from mass to membrane, from shadow carved to light pressed. from mythic monument to domestic instrument. This is why scholars call Westhope transitional, or better, translational. It translates a heroic language of pattern into a livable grammar of light. The 1930s will bring the Usonian houses, economical, low-slung, concrete slab floors with radiant heat, carports, modular grids, built-ins tuned to middle-class budgets architecture as right-sized citizenship. Westhope is not Usonian. It is larger, more ceremonial, tailored to a singular patron, and yet the DNA is already active. The didactic grid-teaching economy of parts and precision of fit. Built-in furniture space made efficient by integration, honest materials concrete, glass, wood in plain speech. Indoor-outdoor continuity not by giant glass walls, but by light continuity. If the Usonian house is a sentence in clear American English, Westhope is the last poetic stanza written before Wright switches prose registers. You can hear the next cadence forming. Westhope completes in the year of the crash. The stock market buckles, commissions evaporate, and era deflates. Against this, Westhope is a counter gesture, not the exuberance of spending, but the discipline of pattern. Geometry becomes a moral act, order amid turmoil. And here is the paradox. The house is both delicate and durable. Delicate in its calibrated light, durable in its stoic blocks. It becomes a metaphor for endurance, how to face uncertainty without ornamented denial. Inside, Wright allows the warmth of wood to answer the mineral cool. Fireplaces mark the grid with hearthly punctuation. The house is precise, yes, but never sterile. It is tuned, like an instrument that wants to be played. Westhope's great room is not grand for grandeur's sake. Its height is proportioned to the width of view, the length of table, the span of conversation. Private rooms introvert just enough to honor solitude. Circulation stitches them back into the social core. From outside, Westhope is opaque enough to protect. From inside, it is translucent enough to release. Privacy and publicity do not duel, they braid. Richard Lloyd Jones edits a city's conscience. Westhope becomes his editorial page in 3 dimensions. Columns of glass and concrete structure belief that light clarifies, that pattern disciplines, that modernity can be moral. Guests absorb the thesis without hearing a word. Architecture argues quietly, persistently. Scholars will later call it an enigmatic chapter, a cathedral of pattern, an early American light machine. All are true. What matters is simpler. People like being in it. They feel held and clarified. This is a bridge you don't cross once. You live on it. Wright's century is a series of inflections. Prairie, home as horizontal democracy. Textile block, home as archetype and myth. Westhope, home as patterned light durable. Ordinary materials given spiritual consequence. Usonia, home as affordable agency. Without Westhope, the leap to Usonia would be too abrupt. Here he proves that system can be sensuous, that order can be tender, that a grid can be loved. If you listen long enough, you realize Westhope isn't just illuminated by light. It illuminates behavior, conversation, the ethics of proportion. It teaches without lecturing, shows without showing off. A house where light is the material and pattern is the conscience. But what if, just as Wright was teaching walls to breathe, another master stepped in from the same Los Angeles crucible and taught structure to disappear? What if the house became sinew and skin, stretched between hillside and horizon, a prescription for modern life? A year after Westhope, on a precipitous site in Los Angeles, Richard Neutra unveiled a manifesto in steel, glass, and health. The Lovell House, 1929. What happens when architecture becomes a physiological machine? Sunlight, air, exercise, and rest tuned like instruments. When a domestic space is engineered like a body, and the body becomes the client, follow us west where the cliff is real, and the frame is the future. If this walk through Westhope illuminated something for you, subscribe to Space, Shape, and Scale. Tell us in the comments what you're seeing, questioning, or which overlooked projects belong in this timeline. Then click to the next episode. Lovell House, 1929. Richard Neutra. From lantern to exoskeleton, from gridded glow to tensile grace, from pattern to performance of the modern body. Because architecture never stops, and neither do we.